We are getting ready to start the English sermon again today, and just making sure that all our broadcasting channels are live and ready to stream. So today we are using YouTube, our YouTube channel, as well as the web radio. So you have the option of either connecting via YouTube or the web radio. Either way, hopefully you can connect with us, you can hear us, and we're also going to be recording the stream today, and hoping to make it available after the program. I'm also led to believe that we have the necessary technical setup today to stream with a much better quality than we are normally able to do, which is always good news. So today's program you'll be able to connect with today's program and listen to today's sermon without a lot of hassle. If you're able to hear me on YouTube and or the web radio, I would really appreciate it if you could kindly drop a message on Skype or YouTube or on our web page, on the web radio page, so we know that it's all good, and then we can get started. Okay, for anyone who's joined us just now, we're just getting ready to get started. As I reminded everyone, we are streaming live via our YouTube channel today, as well as our web radio. So hopefully it will be a better experience for our listeners across the globe. Sometimes we do have technical issues, but today I'm informed that we have a very good technical setup, and therefore the audio quality should be of reasonably good quality, and you should be able to hear us without a lot of difficulty. Excellent. I've just been informed that YouTube is working well, and I think the web radio, our trusted web radio, is also working without a problem today. So let's get started then. As always, before we start discussing the Buddha's Dhamma, we always take a moment to reflect on the fact that it is because of the Buddha's strenuous efforts, his lifelong commitment, and actually not just lifelong, but his commitment throughout samsara, that we have the Buddha's message, his doctrine, his philosophy to understand today and to help us cross the ocean that is samsara. And so before we get started, let us take a moment to reflect on that and pay our respects to the greatest philosopher we have seen in a very, very long time. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. And also, it's important that as Buddhists we take a moment to recognize that the reason we are lucky enough, we are fortunate enough to be on the receiving end of this Dhamma, to be able to understand this Dhamma, is because we have both acquired good merits from our previous births, and also there are plenty of others who have helped us along the way. People without whom we would not today be in a position where we are able to understand the Lord Buddha's teaching, to receive the Lord Buddha's teaching, and to have it in a format, both audio, video, textual, cast your mind back to the Mahasangha, to all those monks who many years ago dedicated their lives to protect the Buddhist scriptures that we use today to read and understand the Lord Buddha's teaching. Because quite frankly, without having access to these scriptures, the Tripitaka, we would not today be in a position to be able to get into the real depth of this teaching. We might have the superficial teaching, and that is what we have been studying, we have been following, rather than being a student of for many years. I myself am guilty of that. Not necessarily guilty, but you got to do with what you've got. But when you have the opportunity to go into that depth, to get into the crux of it, to try and make sense, to try and dissect the teaching so that it makes sense, so that you get to the core teaching then it's important that we have the opportunity to do that, and we take the opportunity to do that. And the reason we have that today is because there are lots and lots of people who have dedicated their lives, who sacrificed their lives even, so that we are today in a position to be able to do that. And also, there are people who we have come face to face. We have passed on our way in samsara, who are today either devas, brahmas possibly, who are quite clearly in a better place than we are in the human realm. But that in itself is not necessarily the true metric of whether someone is in the best place they could be. The best place one could be in samsara is, well, if you're still in samsara, then to be in a place where you are able to receive the Lord Buddha's message, to be able to understand the Lord Buddha's teaching. Not just be able to listen to it, but to understand it. Not just to be able to hear it, but to listen, and not just to be able to listen, but also to understand it. And we are in such a place. This is why we get together like this every week. But there are devas and brahmas who might not necessarily have that opportunity, and therefore it is our duty, our obligation to invite them when we have these programs. And also any beings who are not so fortunate enough to be able to receive this message, to be able to listen to this message, unless they receive an invitation from us. And perhaps, beings who are in places where they are not able to use their own wisdom, perhaps it's because the lack of it, they're not able to do better for themselves. Let us take a moment to invite them. So as I invite them, I ask you to extend that invitation to any beings who we may have passed on the way here, whether that is by someone who might have helped you with a glass of water or showed you the way when you were lost and were looking for direction. So as I make this invitation, please extend that invitation out to your loved ones, people you've come past in samsara, and also devas, brahmas and so forth. Samanta chakravalesu atra gachantu devata Sadhammam munirajasansa sunantu sagga mokkadam dhammasavana kalo ayam badanta dhammasavana kalo ayam badanta dhammasavana kalo ayam badanta. Okay, As a reminder to anyone that might have just joined us, we are streaming live today on YouTube. We're also streaming on our web radio, so you have the option of either. We are also recording this program, and we will make it available after the end of the program. Last week we discussed rebirth to some extent. We continued the discussion of dependent origination, that is paticca-samuppada, and we took it one step further from the previous week. I think what I would like to do today, now I know there have been a few questions since we had those discussions, and we will revisit them at a suitable point. There was particularly one about, there was a request even to explain the deep meaning of the 5 precepts, and we'll be doing that very shortly. Not necessarily today. I think it will be in a future program, because today I wanted to one, revisit something that we talked about last week, and that was the concept of rebirth, because I have received a couple of questions around that. And also, secondly, talk to you about something that I have been reflecting on over the last week during my meditation sessions, and hopefully something that will help you to understand how to relate expectations to the 4 Noble Truths. So we'll come back to that, but let's go to the questions we received initially, and this was around rebirth. So I'll read out the question that I have received. It says, I'm an American who is learning about Buddhism. My family and I have listened to some of these deshanas, sermons, for several weeks, and we appreciate the effort. Question 1 is, compared to core Buddhist teachings like the 4 Noble Truths and the Noble Eightfold Path, how important is the doctrine of rebirth? This person goes on to say, I tend to view it as a cultural holdover from ancient India and of very little value to modern Buddhist practice. The second question related to that is, how do you reconcile the contradiction between rebirth and anatta? Within brackets, they have included a translation of that, no self, or selflessness, I think. And thirdly, what evidence is there for the existence of rebirth? I think the third part, which is what evidence is there for the existence of rebirth, we discussed to some extent in the previous program, particularly towards the end of it. Now I don't know whether you were able to listen to the recording, because what I did notice was, actually last week we lost power halfway through. It was raining cats and dogs, and there was a power cut. So towards the end of the program, I didn't realize that the stream had ended. However, I have made the recording available, and hopefully that will answer that question to some extent, but I will revisit that, because I think it's important that we try and tie these 3 together. In fact, I'll start with the third question, what evidence is there for the existence of rebirth? So, when we look at evidence, or when we look for evidence for rebirth, I think it's important to say, and I said this last week as well, it's not something that I can provide to you as material evidence. Certainly not yet. I'm not able to get you to sit in front of me and then kind of hypnotize you or get you to transcend into a previous birth and do some magic, or some kind of jiggery-pokery, some kind of wizardry even, or even cast a spell, I don't know. to get you to be able to view your previous births and then recall what you may or may not have done, and therefore prove to you without any doubt that there is the existence of rebirth. Now, quite frankly, I am not able to do that on myself either. Again, as I say, not yet. There is a faculty or a jnana. It's called a wisdom. It's called the Pubbhe Nivasanusati jnana, or the wisdom to be able to, sorry, not wisdom, I probably say it's a skill, the skill to be able to view, to be able to recall previous births. Pubbhe Nivasanusati, Pubbhe being previous, Nivasa being your home, where you've been, Sati being to be able to reflect. So Pubbhe Nivasanusati jnana being the skill or the talent to be able to reflect on your previous births. So one is able to develop that skill, that talent, through meditation, and usually comes after you've attained the fourth jhana. The fourth jhana, and you've trained your mind you've trained your mind to a great deal to retain the fourth jhana. And once you attain that, you are then able to direct your mind in certain ways to be able to acquire these skills. So Pubbhe Nivasanusati jnana is certainly a skill that one can obtain, but it's not one that I have obtained as yet. And so therefore I can't give you material evidence. So for example, I can't tell you exactly what my previous birth was, and then say, you know, go and speak to so-and-so or such and such person, and they'll be able to confirm this, when I might not have spoken to that person or had any connection with that person. However, when you look at evidence for rebirth on the internet, there have been plenty of case studies, there have been lots of books written on this. The likes of Edgar Cayce, who was a Western, I think she's a doctor, philosopher, who has done a lot of research on this subject. When you look at how people relate their previous births and relate previous incidents that have happened, sometimes many years ago, sometimes little young children who have not yet been able to interact with a part of the world, who are able to relate stories from a part of the world that they have not yet had any kind of relationship to, not in this birth anyway. You begin to wonder, how is it that they are able to do that? Or sometimes you have people who, again, young children who have some extraordinary skills. They're able to do extraordinary things like compose music or play an instrument, and however they have not had any training whatsoever in this birth on doing that, on playing such an instrument. It makes you think, surely this person, this child should have had some kind of training or some kind of skill, some kind of talent that they in a previous existence. And the way that I see evidence for rebirth, if you're looking for evidence outside of Buddhist teaching, is, I think it was Einstein that once said, when you look at all of the facts and you've removed everything that doesn't make sense, or you've removed everything that does not add up, that is not logical, whatever remains, no matter how difficult to believe, you've got to accept that as being the truth. Now, when it comes to the philosophy of, or the concept of rebirth, this is something that I view in that context. if, again, as I say, if you're looking at it from outside the Buddhist perspective, when you consider all of the evidence that's in front of you, or when you consider all of the facts that are in front of you, and you then start making sense of it, how is it that this child relates a story, something that has happened sometimes centuries ago. There's no way that they could have had any connection to anyone that is from that era, from that time period. However, the facts that they're relating are factually accurate when you go and examine books, history and so forth. Then you rule out anything that is impossible, and then whatever remains, no matter how hard it is to accept, is the truth. And with evidence for rebirth, it's very much a case of, it's very much, that is very much the case. When you look at these stories and you try and remove all of the other pieces of information, when you remove the other possibilities as being improbable, then and you use the hypothesis that rebirth exists, then it just happens to be that rebirth is the only way to describe, is the only way to explain how such and such thing has happened, or how a child is relating that kind of history. Now that is outside of Buddhist teaching. But when you reflect on Buddhist teaching, we have the process that is dependent origination, paticcasamuppada, and paticcasamuppada is all about giving rise to existence and therefore to birth. Now, at this point, I'd like to also bring in the first question, which is, compared to core Buddhist teachings like the Four Noble Truths and the Noble Eightfold Path, how important is the doctrine of rebirth? And as I said, they go on to say, I tend to view it as a cultural holdover from ancient India and of very little value to modern Buddhist practice. Paticcasamuppada, or dependent origination, is often actually used to describe how rebirth takes place. And if you speak to 90% of Buddhist scholars, they'll immediately tell you what, if you ask the question, what do we use paticcasamuppada for? The response that you'll get almost immediately is, well, that's the philosophy, that's the doctrine that teaches us how rebirth takes place. And they're talking about rebirth in, life after death. And then if you study paticcasamuppada, you see that, clearly it's a process. So you lay out the process, you have the inputs, you have whatever happens in the middle, and then you have the outputs. The outputs being existence, bhava, and jati, birth. So if that's the output, then you look at what are the inputs. So it's avidya paccaya, so avidya being the condition, or that's ignorance being a condition. And then it's bhava paccaya jati. So as long as you continue to produce the seeds that are the foundations to bhava, to existence, that gives rise to birth, bhava paccaya jati. And then you work your way back, upadana paccaya bhava, upadana being close association, tanha paccaya upadana, tanha being attachment, so attachment gives rise to close association gives rise to existence, existence gives or results in birth. So when you study that process and you accept that this is the process that the Lord Buddha gave us to understand the concept of rebirth, then quite frankly you're not left with a lot of choice than to accept that, this is what the Lord Buddha says is how rebirth takes place. I mean, remember that the Lord Buddha says, Yo dhammam passati, so mang passati, and then yo paticcasamuppadam passati, so dhammam passati. So he says, if you want to view me, you've got to see the Dhamma, and then if you want to see the Dhamma, you've got to understand paticcasamuppada, or dependent origination. And therefore it's quite clear that dependent origination is, I would say, the core teaching in Buddhism. It's the most fundamental, it's the most fundamental piece of the Buddhist doctrine. Without Paticcasamuppada, you have no Buddhism. Buddhism in the way that we need to understand to achieve the result that the Lord Buddha wanted us to, which is to end this rebirth cycle, put an end to suffering, and seek liberation. So, what I would say is, in response to this question, compared to core Buddhist teachings, how important is the doctrine of rebirth? Rebirth is actually fundamental to Buddhist teaching. It is a core principle in core doctrine in Buddhism, and because if you think about it, I've said this before, what do we do in life? You know, we often define life as a mechanism to seek pleasure, to seek happiness, and we seek pleasure and happiness by finding ourselves in situations where we suffer and then relieve ourselves from that situation. As a quick reminder of some examples, if you believe or if you have experienced that food brings you, or the process of eating brings you happiness, then it only brings you happiness when you're hungry. So you have to be suffering first to then relieve yourself from that suffering, and for that moment when you're relieved from that suffering, you enjoy pleasure, you enjoy happiness, satisfaction. Again, if you are thirsty, then a glass of water can relieve you from thirst, and that experience is joyful, brings you happiness, brings you pleasure. But if you're not hungry, then food does not give you as much happiness, does not give you as much pleasure. If you're not feeling hot, then a fan or an air conditioner does not give you as much pleasure. But if you're feeling really hot and sweaty, and you're feeling tired, then on a hot day, you want to switch the air conditioning on. You like some cool air brushing on your body. Feels good because you're then relieved of that discomfort. You're relieved from that unpleasurable experience. Now, what the Lord Buddha comes into this world and questions us is, do you not realize that the only time you can experience pleasure is when you experience discomfort, when you experience agony, when you experience pain and suffering, and then you are relieved from that discomfort, you are relieved from that painful experience, you are relieved from agony. And then he asks us, well, if that is the case, how can you believe that true satisfaction, true pleasure lies in that process? Because to be able to experience that, again, this is a reminder because we've discussed this plenty of times before, but I'm going to come to the point I'm trying to make, but I need to set this background first, so in case you haven't listened to this bit before, this might be a good reminder. So he asks us a question, how can it be a meaningful process if to experience that pleasure, to experience that happiness and satisfaction, you have to subject yourself to discomfort in the first place. I'll remind you of one example which I find is very popular, particularly among the young audience, or certainly for people who like watching movies. I've described this before, where I've asked you the question: how does one enjoy watching a movie? How does one take pleasure in watching a movie? Have a think for yourself for a second. Is it not when, if you looked at the process of how someone goes to the cinema, sits down, watches a movie, goes through the process and walks out of the cinema thinking that was a good movie, I enjoyed that. we never take time to reflect on this, which is why we find ourselves stuck in this fruitless, in this futile process, suffering time and time again. So as I've said in the past, in the movie you're introduced to some characters. Some of these characters you like a lot, others you don't like. So you'll have the hero, you'll have perhaps say there's a nice family that's introduced in the story, and you're thinking that's a lovely family. I really hope that nothing bad happens to them and they're able to live a happy life forever and ever. So that's where you're starting. And then slowly you're introduced to this villain, and the villain has characteristics you don't like. Sometimes it could be portrayed by the way that they've been dressed up. It could be the makeup. It could be how they speak. It could be the things they do. Things that people in society and in society don't generally like to associate themselves with. Okay, so perhaps they speak foul language. Maybe they are addicted to certain things, and for some people, immediately they want to distance themselves from those characters, and you're thinking, that's the good guy, here's the bad guy, okay? So what happens then in the story is the villain in the story somehow gets involved with these characters that you think are good, and then there is either a fight, there could be some kind of there could be some kind of a brawl, there could be some kind of argument between them, or perhaps someone gets kidnapped, someone has their money stolen from them, someone is shot or maybe put in hospital. Now you've got to remind yourselves at this point that none of those characters in the movie are actually put into any kind of hurt, discomfort, or anything like that. They're not wounded, they don't suffer any kind of physical discomfort, physical injury whatsoever. And remember, they're being paid. So they're living the good life. But guess who's suffering? You and I are suffering. Why? Because at the beginning of the story, we've got this liking. There's a liking that we've created for these characters in our minds, and we dislike the villain. So we don't like the villain. We really like the good guys. And so when something bad happens to the good guys, now who's feeling uncomfortable? Who's feeling sad? Who's feeling disappointed? It's not the person that's acting. Remember, they're getting paid to do this, and not a single body on their not a single hair on their body is being hurt or harmed. It's you and I, because we are watching this. And this is where anicca comes in. You don't want something bad to happen to that person, but that's what they're being subject to. They're being subject to pain and agony and discomfort and all sorts of bad things. Now, what does the director do at that point? The story comes to a climax, and at that point, the good guy somehow fights back. The good guy, gets the family gets back together again. They're able to recover the money that they might have lost, or the good guy he recovers from hospital or from some kind of loss. Perhaps it's a child who was lost or got kidnapped, and the child is back with the family. The bad guys get put in prison. So all of these things happen. Now, do we ever take a moment to realize what's actually going on in front of our eyes? At the beginning of the story, the director wanted us to fall in love with the good guys and start hating the bad guys. So raga dvesha, okay? Desire and aversion already. You've now attached yourself to something and you want to distance yourself from something else. Then what happens? The director gets the bad guys to beat up the good guys. Now, someone you like is getting hurt. Someone you like is getting shot. Someone you like is getting wounded, getting injured. Obviously, you're not going to like that, and so now you're in distress. You're feeling bad. You're feeling terrible. You're feeling hurt. In fact, you're suffering. They're getting paid, remember? You're suffering, okay? And then what do they do towards the end of the story? At the point of the climax, the good guy is relieved. The good guy is put back into a place where they're back in a good place, they're back with their family, they've got their money back and all that. Now again, they're just acting. They're getting paid, the actors. Who do you think is really going through the emotions? You and I, watching the movie. So we were made to attach ourselves to something. Remember, attachment leads to suffering. Tanhai jayati soko. Attachment leads to suffering, okay? So at the beginning of the story, you're attached to something. You're now suffering in the middle of the story because whatever you were attached to is being hurt, and then you're relieved from that suffering. And then you feel good. You feel a sense of pleasure. You feel comfort. You're thinking, oh, thank God those guys were saved. I'm so glad that I came to watch this movie. Because otherwise, how else would the good guys have been saved? Now, if you really think about this, what you're really doing is going and giving your hard-earned money, your hard-earned dollars, your hard-earned pounds, your cash, to the person that's producing the cinema, or to the person that's producing the film, and saying, what you're really doing is saying, hey, Mr. Producer, can you take some of my hard-earned money, okay, put me into discomfort, make me feel really terrible, make me feel bad, make me feel distressed, and then relieve me from that, please? Isn't that what you're doing? You're paying them to put you into agony and then relieve you from that agony. And then you're walking out of that cinema thinking, I feel good now. Do you see the irony in that? So the reason I relate this story is to relate the point I was trying to make before. And that is, the Buddha, this is what the Lord Buddha asks us. In every birth that you're born, you have to go through hunger, and when you're feeling hungry, you feed yourself, you put food in your tummy, and now you're feeling good. When you're feeling thirsty, you drink some water, you take a drink, and now you're feeling, your thirst has been quenched. Okay? When you're feeling distressed psychologically, say for example you are wanting your kids to pass the exams or get to a good place, get a good job, right? Then you get them to work really hard, or you go work hard, and you're then relieved once you get the results of that. You're relieved from that distress. At any point to experience that good feeling, to experience pleasure, you have to either be put into discomfort by some other external factor, or you've got to do it yourself. I'll give you a funny story. Why do you feel relieved when you go to the toilet? You feel a sense of, that was good, when you go to the toilet. Because you're feeling a sense of discomfort. You walk in there, you relieve yourself, and now the process of doing that feels good. And this is why I've asked you in the past, which feels better? Relieving yourself from hunger when you've been hungry for 1 day, or relieving yourself from hunger when you've been hungry for 2 days? Well, it's clearly when you've been hungry for, the longer you've been hungry for, the better it feels, the more pleasure you feel in relieving yourself from that pain. Now, this is what the Lord Buddha asks us. He asks us, do you forever go through this process of subjecting yourself to pain and then relieving yourself from it? And you've been doing it many, many times over in samsara? Or do you find the root cause that gets you into that pain, into that agony, into that discomfort in the first place, and then remove the root causes so that you don't get into that position in the first place? For example, if it's hunger we're talking about, relieving yourself from hunger feels good, agreed. But what if you didn't feel hungry in the first place? You're now not having to treat an ailment. You're not having to treat a condition, that is hunger. Clearly that's better than having to treat hunger and then feeling good about it, because, well, you're suffering. For that time you're hungry, you're suffering. And not just that. Food doesn't grow on trees. Well, some of it does, but you know what I mean. You've got to work for it. You've got to go find it. You've got to go, work for it. You've got to pay money, and for that you have to work hard. You've got to cook your food. You've got to, there's no such thing as a free lunch. Is a very popular saying. That's because you've got to work for it. So not only are you having to relieve yourself from pain, but you're having to work for it as well, which also brings you discomfort, even more pain. This is why it's called abhisankara. So hopefully that is a good reminder for those who, if you might have not listened to that discussion in a previous sermon about how futile this process of going through samsara and trying to find pleasure and happiness is. Now, the choice we have though is, without doing that, what if we asked ourselves, well, why is it that I feel hungry in the first place? Is it not because I have a stomach? Why do I have a stomach? Is it not because I'm born a human, or an animal, a human being, an animal, whichever? What is the cause for that? Isn't the cause for that that's where we get into paticcasamuppada, dependent origination. You're born a human because you have planted the seeds to have been born a human. By seeds, I don't mean conception. I mean the paticcasamuppada process, bhava-paccaya jati. Existence gives rise to birth. So as long as you have cultivated, as long as you've cultivated sankhara to be born a human being, you are going to be born a human being. And this is why the Lord Buddha says, the only way that you can put a stop for good to this process of having to treat your ailments is if you find the root cause and then treat the root cause. So for as long as we are in samsara, for as long as we are reborn, you have to go through the process of treating hunger, treating thirst, treating diseases, treating feeling lonely, feeling dissatisfaction, all of these things that bring you pain. Having to the feeling you get when you have to associate with people you don't like, the feeling you get when you have to dissociate or distance yourself from people that you do like. All of these things you're having to do because you're born a human being. You're born an animal, you're born a deva or even a brahma. So if you put a stop to that process at the root, then you're stopping birth at the root. And as long as birth has been stopped, then none of the above takes place. So, coming back to the question, compared to core Buddhist teachings, how important is the doctrine of rebirth? Well, hopefully you're able to understand that from what we've discussed, it is the process of rebirth that the Buddha comes to cure. That's the disease that he comes to cure. Because, think about it. If it was just this life that we had to put up with, and I use that word very deliberately, if it's just this life that we have to put up with, the suffering that comes with this life, i.e. having to go work, having to study hard, having to be subject to pain, to suffering, to disease, to decay, death, all of these things, right? If it was just this birth that we had to put up with these things, quite frankly, what's the big deal? Think about it. If it was just this birth, I mean, there are people who tell me that they don't believe in rebirth, and so my question to them is then, well, if you don't believe in rebirth, so there are two questions I ask them. The first is, When they tell me they don't believe in rebirth, my first question is, well, do you enjoy your life as it is? And they say, yeah, well, sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not so good. And then I ask them, well, 50% of the time or 51% of the time, is it good or bad? They think about it and they tell me, well, I've got to be honest, but 51% of the time, or more times than not, I'm actually suffering. It's either because I've got to go work, as in do a job. I mean, think about it, right? For the 24 hours that we have a day, if you're, people work for about 8 hours of that, 8 or 9 hours. Some people do overtime. So you're actually working for about almost half the day. Now, you may be one of the fortunate ones that enjoys working, but if you were able to be paid or given everything that you wanted in life without having to work for it, would you take it? If not, why do you go on holiday? Again, think about it. Why do you take a break from work? If you really, really, really enjoyed work, why do you take a break from work? If that was the one thing that made you really happy, then surely, if every moment that you're awake, you should be looking to work. Now, some people do this, but that's not out of choice, because they have to. So, in any case, we have to work, we have to be subject to disease, to decay, to death, sometimes loss of loved ones, sometimes, family breakups, children that die at a young age, and, parents who have to say goodbye to them. All of these things which bring a lot of pain. And then, if you're subject to pain 51% of the time, by which I mean more of the time than when you're actually happy, enjoying life, and you believe that this is it, there's no rebirth after this, quite frankly, what's the point of staying alive? You might as well go commit suicide. I'm not, I condemn suicide like no one does, but what I do mean, the point I'm trying to make is, if there is no rebirth and you're thinking, actually, there's more pain in this life than happiness, there's more sorrow than there is joy and happiness. Why do you live this life? Why not just put an end to it? Well, the reason we don't do that is because either, you're really attached to this life, but then you've got to ask yourself the question, well, if I'm suffering more times than I'm not, why is it that I'm attached to this life? And the second is, well, this is not the last birth, there's a rebirth after this. I'm going to be born somewhere else. So ending your life does not answer the question, is not an end to the story. It's not the solution to the problem. Because if it was, I would be the first to do it. That does not cure the problem. Because as long as there is ignorance and attachment, avidya and tanha, these defilements in your mind, the rebirth process takes place. So rebirth does not stop. And in every birth that in every birth that takes place, you have to go through these things. You have to go feed yourself. You have to go wash yourself. You have to go work for an existence. You have to go find shelter. You have to go find food. You have to go find medicines, and you have to go find clothes and all of these things. So euthanasia, or putting an end to your life, or suicide, is not a solution to the problem. This is why you need to focus on trying to find the solution to ending the rebirth process, and that is why the Lord Buddha gives us Paticcasamuppada. He shows us this is how rebirth takes place. Here are the reasons for rebirth, the causes that give rise to rebirth. And so if you put an end to these causes, then you've put an end to rebirth. So it's fundamental to Buddhism. Now, the second question is actually quite interesting, because the question is, how do you reconcile the contradiction between rebirth and anatta? We've discussed anatta in the past, and hopefully this will be a good reminder to those who might have listened in to those discussions, but perhaps a good refresher is worth it. The Lord Buddha says, I don't speak of Atma or Anatma. My philosophy is that of cause and effect. He says, I don't speak of a self, or I don't teach of a self, I don't teach of a no self. I teach causal, I teach dependent origination, cause and effect. So this interpretation of anatta that is in the Tripitaka, today this has been translated into Sinhala as anatma and to English as no self. But it's worth taking a moment to examine the validity of this translation, to try and ask ourselves, well, what does that actually mean? And then to look to see if perhaps we are actually dealing with the most appropriate meaning, or if there's something else hidden in the word anatta. Now, the Lord Buddha asks us this question: is your I, icca or anicca? Now, hopefully you've listened to our discussion about icca, anicca, dukkha, and maybe even anatta in the past. But as a reminder, he asks us the question, is this icca or anicca? Now, icca is something that is to our liking. Today we give a very loose translation to that, and in fact an incorrect translation, which is impermanence. And it's quite sad that we've accepted impermanence to be the English translation to the word anicca. Because let's take a very simple example. Imagine you had some kind of disease. Let's keep it simple. You've got a headache, okay? Now, if you're of the belief that if something is impermanent, then that gives rise to suffering, does that apply in the case of a headache? So you have a headache. Would it cause you suffering if the headache was permanent or if it was impermanent? Think about it. Quite clearly, if the headache were permanent, then you'd be suffering forever. But is it not because your headache is impermanent, by which I mean you could either, over time your headache goes away, or perhaps you take some medicine for it and then you treat it and then it goes away. So the fact that it's impermanent, your headache being impermanent, isn't that good? Isn't that a good thing? What about if you were in a job? You're in a job and you've been doing that job for many years and you're looking for a promotion, or you're looking to change jobs. You want to go work somewhere else for perhaps better prospects. Well, if your job was permanent, I don't mean a permanent role, what I mean by that is you're not able to change that. If your job was permanent, you wouldn't be able to leave that job and go do something else. Now, surely, if what you wanted to do was to leave your workplace and go elsewhere, then that's what's going to make you happy. So it's impermanent, quite clearly. The fact that you can leave your job and go work elsewhere is impermanence. I mean, that's an example of impermanence. Your job is not permanent. So, isn't that a good thing? The fact that you are able to do that. If your job were permanent, then no matter where you'd like to go and work, you wouldn't be able to leave that place. Or say, perhaps you were in a relationship, and the relationship was going bad. You didn't want to stay in that relationship for much longer, or you're trying to get out of that relationship. If that relationship were permanent, i.e. you couldn't break up that relationship, would that cause you suffering? Well, clearly it would. The fact that it's permanent is what's going to cause you suffering, not the fact that it's impermanent. Hopefully that's making sense. So the relationship being impermanent is a good thing, if you wanted to get out of it. Now, granted, if you enjoyed being in that relationship, then it being impermanent is not such a good thing, because you want it to be permanent. You want it to, you want that relationship to last for a long time, for you to be happy with each other. If that were the case, then great. But if that wasn't the case, some people get divorced. Now, if that relationship, that connection was permanent, that would be problematic. You'd be suffering for the rest of your life. So, these are but few examples for you to think about. Is it impermanence that gives rise to suffering? Or perhaps is it that we've given a somewhat skewed or incorrect interpretation to the word anicca that is in the Tripitaka? Now, I'll give you, in fact, I ask you, it's a challenge, if you can find one place in the Tripitaka, and I'm talking about the Pali Tripitaka, I'm not talking about a singular translation, if you can find one place in the Pali Tripitaka where the word anitya is mentioned, then please let me know. I can't say I've read the entire Tripitaka, but I am confident that you're only going to find anicca. For example, if you look at Girimananda Sutra, the sutra which the Lord Buddha, the discourse that the Lord Buddha gave to Venerable Ananda, so that he could in turn go and preach to Venerable Girimananda. It's also a quite popular one, because it can be found in the Pirit book, Piruvana Pot Vahanse. You'll see Katamachananda Anicca Sanya, and it talks about anicca in lots of places. Throughout the Tripitaka you will find references to anicca. The reason I'm talking about anicca right now is because to get to anatta, you need to have covered your bases. It would make little sense for someone if I just jumped straight to anatta, because there's a strong interlink between these terms. So is it impermanence that gives rise to suffering? And we've just listened to some examples where that is not the case. The headache, the bad relationship that you're in, and not you're in, but you get the idea. If you were in a bad relationship, I don't hope that or wish that on anyone. The job that you're not liking, the job that you want to get out of, right? In all of these cases, you want it to be impermanent, and only if it was impermanent you would actually enjoy the outcome. If it were permanent, then that would not be a pleasant experience for you by any stretch of imagination. So, but what anicca means, and this is where the Lord Buddha talks about the interpretation that we've got to take from the Tripitaka, is let's look at the etymology of the word anicca. Icca in Pali and icca in Sinhala even is one's liking. Now there are a few examples that I can give in Sinhala, and I'm afraid I'm going to have to use the Sinhala language here to try and explain this, because otherwise there is no way I can give a direct translation to the word anicca. Certainly not if I'm trying to explain how the word anicca means what I'm trying to say it means. I have to use a language, a mediatory language for that purpose. So if you'll hear the word, so the term voluntary in Sinhalese is swecha. For example, a voluntary organization is a swecha sangvidhane being organization, swecha being voluntary. If you did something on a voluntary basis, then someone would say swechaving karapudeyak. That's something I've done on a voluntary basis. So swa icha, you see the word iccha comes there. Swa being self, iccha being your liking, your desire, because that's how something becomes voluntary. For example, if you were a voluntary nurse in a hospital, you're doing it out of your own liking. No one's forcing you to do it. Someone might have asked you to do it, but no one's forcing you to do it. No one's, you're not getting paid to do it. There's no remuneration there. You're doing it out of your own liking. You have your own desire to do it, and you're not looking for any remuneration for that. That's when it becomes voluntary. So to do a service that is voluntary, you have to have a liking, a strong liking, in fact. So swa iccha, swa being self, iccha being liking. You see the word swecha means voluntary. So the word iccha comes there. Let's take another example. The term or the word for disappointment in Sinhala is iccha bhanga, iccha bhangatve. Again, bhanga is to destroy, to be destroyed. And again, the word iccha comes here again. So iccha being liking, and for someone's liking to be destroyed is clearly disappointment. I like something, I want something, when that is not fulfilled, I'm disappointment. So you see how iccha is actually more to do with one's liking, one's desire, one's wish for something to be a certain way, more so than impermanence. I'm hoping that this message is sinking with you. Please let me know if that's not clear enough, and I'll try and give a few more examples. But I'm hoping it's coming together. So you see the word iccha is liking, it's desire, it's someone's wish. And therefore, when the Lord Buddha says all sankata being things that are conditioned, and this includes your pet cat, your furniture, your house, your life, your body, anything that is conditioned, anything that has come into being due to causes coming together, is subject to anicca. So what does he mean by that? It is not to your liking. It is not the way it is because you want it to be the way it is, or you want it to be a certain way. It is not the way it is because that is what you desire. Let's again take an example. Now, it's been raining heavily. I'm in Anuradhapura at the moment. It's been raining for the last few days. Only yesterday, someone walked up to me and said, it's been raining for a few days now, and we've been waiting for rain for a long period of time in Anuradhapura, but now that it's been raining for a few days, we're hoping that it goes away. So, let's see how iccha, or one's desire, one's liking, one's wish, what wish or desire has to do with this. Now this person, when it wasn't raining for many months, they were wishing for rain, they were hoping for rain, they were, that was their desire, because he's also a farmer, so he's wanting rain. And then it rains. Now, for all the time that he's been wanting it to rain, it didn't rain. All those months that he wanted it to rain, it didn't rain. And then one fine day it starts raining, and then it continues raining for many days. Now he wants the rain to stop, but it's not. It continues to rain. So, do you understand how whether it rains or does not rain has nothing to do with whether he wants it to rain, he wishes for it to rain, or that is his desire. As long as the conditions are right for it to rain, it's going to rain. I'll take another example. Let's say there was a cricket match. Because, this is something that we really need to get our heads around. Because all of Buddhism, in fact, and if you condensed, and I've said this before, if you condensed all of Buddhism into one single point, imagine Buddhism was a universe. and you condense the entire universe, you know how they talk about the Big Bang Theory? I'm not talking about the TV series, by the way. If you condense the entire universe into one single point, you get whatever you get. You know, that's where people say that's how the Big Bang happened, right? But if you condense all of Buddhism into one point, then that would be the concept of anicca. This is why the Lord Buddha says, Nahi silena vatang hotu uppajjanti tathagata attakkara tini pada sambuddhena prakashita. The Buddha doesn't come into this world to talk about sila, to talk about precepts, or to talk about observances. What he does come into this universe is to teach about anicca, dukkha and anatta. This is what we're discussing now. So clearly, and he also then says, to see me is to see the Dhamma, and to see the Dhamma is to see Paticcasamuppada. So quite clearly there's a very strong interlink between Paticcasamuppada and anicca, dukkha, anatta. And hopefully today we can try and make that link and try and talk about that as well. So we were trying to give meaning to the word anicca. Now, the example I was going to give is, let's say, a cricket match. We all like a bit of cricket. So, two teams. Let's say you have Sri Lanka playing, I don't know, whichever your favorite cricket team is, that is not Sri Lanka. For those of you living in Australia, perhaps that's Australia. For those of you living in England, perhaps that's the England team. Wherever you are, imagine that's that country. For my example, I'm going to use England. Okay? So, England and Sri Lanka are about to play a cricket match, and if we were to say that it's either my liking, my wish, my desire that's going to be the result, or perhaps that of the players that's going to be the result, or the Sri Lankan team, then how, could I be any further from the truth? Well, let's examine this. If one were to say, the more that people wish for a certain result, that result is going to be what's going to be, then if simple logic tells me that the population of Sri Lanka is a very small fraction of the population of England. So more people clearly, when this match is being played, when this game is being played, are hoping for England to win this game. And a very small proportion of that are hoping for Sri Lanka to win this game. If that were the case, and if it was the number of people that were wishing for a certain outcome was the deciding factor, or even had anything to do with what the outcome was going to be, would that game be worth playing at all? Would Sri Lanka, is it ever in Sri Lanka's interest to play a country that is geographically bigger than them? Sri Lanka being such a small island, they would have very little choice in the game of cricket as to who they play with, to be quite frank. So, naturally, if that were the logic there, and if that were the case, then England would win every time. Because, Sri Lanka, very small population compared to that of England, so the England team are going to win every single time. The Australian team are going to win every single time. The Indian team is going to win every single time. Why? Well, if we are basing our argument on the fact that, something being the outcome is to my liking. This is the outcome because I want it to be the case. I want Sri Lanka to win, and therefore Sri Lanka is going to win. Well, while me and maybe 2 million other people are wishing for that, there are about 20 million people, let's say, I'm pulling this number out of thin air, let's say in England 20 million people, 30 million people are wishing for England to win the game. Beyond comparison, that game is not worth being played. However, imagine you go to someone that is a bookkeeper, okay, so if you're not familiar with who a bookkeeper is, that's someone who takes your money and you place a bet. And then if you win, you get a bigger stake. So you get a payback for that. If the country or if the outcome that you're predicting is not going to happen, then you lose. So that's how betting works. I've never done it, but I'm told that's how it works. So, if you go to a bookkeeper, the bookkeeper is going to ask you a few questions. What are they going to ask you? They're going to ask you, who's going to be playing today? And you're going to say, well, it's England versus Sri Lanka. Then they're going to ask you, where are they going to be playing this game? And then you're going to say, let's say, for example, it's going to be played in Sri Lanka. And then they're going to ask you, okay, great, which ground are they going to be playing this in? You're going to say Sukadadasa, or say Premadasa Stadium. It doesn't really matter. Okay? And then they ask you, who's the umpire? Who are the umpires? Do they favor batsmen or do they favor bowlers? Then they're going to ask you, what's the weather like? Is it wet weather today or is it quite sunny? Now, if you think about it, what are they actually asking you? What they're asking you are, what are the conditions that's going to give you a certain outcome? In fact, what they're doing for their own, in their own records is lining up all the conditions. So they've got, I imagine this is how they do it. They've got, let's keep it really simple. He's got a bit of pen and paper. The bookkeeper, he's written down all of the conditions that he uses to give the prediction. He's writing down all of these conditions. These are the two countries that are playing. Here's the game that they're playing. Here are the players. Here's how experienced they are. Here's how many bowlers are in this team. And here's how many batsmen this team's got. What about the other team? Here are the umpires. Here's how experienced those umpires are. It's a wet weather today, and the game's played at Premadasa Stadium. So what are they doing? They're writing down all of the conditions that's going to give a certain outcome. Now, once all the conditions fit into their place, the bookkeeper is going to give you an outcome, and they're going to say, I predict that this, X country is going to win this game. That could be Sri Lanka, it could be England. I don't know. They're going to predict. Now, they're not going to be able to predict it, accurately 100% of the time, because they're not able to foresee all of the conditions. But they're going to be able to give a good go. They're going to have a good go at it. Why? Because they're experienced. They've been doing it for some time. They've studied the multiple conditions that give rise to a certain outcome, and based on that, they're going to give you the outcome. They're going to give you their prediction. Why is it that we fail to see that what they're doing is a really good example of cause and effect? We fail to see that, and we think that actually Sri Lanka is going to win because I want Sri Lanka to win this game. Or our English counterparts are going to think, oh, England are going to win because I want England to win this game. Do you see how whether England wants to win this game or the Sri Lankan population or even the team wants to win that game has got absolutely nothing to do with the outcome? I mean, clearly you do make certain assumptions all the time. So, all of these conditions that you can't see, that you can't tell for sure, you're going to have to make assumptions. For example, you might say, I'm going to assume that all the players are in good physical and mental health. Now that's an assumption. But that assumption is not always true. In fact, most of the time, it's probably untrue. Because each of the players may have they might have had a bad day, or they might be feeling hungry. I don't know. They might not be feeling their best for whatever reason. And it's difficult to take all of that into consideration, because then it becomes a very, very complex equation to give an outcome to. But this is what the Lord Buddha was able to do. But this power only the Lord Buddha possesses. The power to see through all of the causes that give rise to a certain conditions. This is how the Dipankara Lord Buddha was able to foresee the future and predict, not even predict, but forecast, that the Bodhisattva was going to be born, was going to be Lord Buddha in a future birth as Gautama Lord Buddha. So what we're seeing here is clearly that this is all sankata, all things that are conditioned are it's a case of cause and effect. As long as the causes are right, you get the condition. So you get the effect. It's cause and effect. Whether you want it to be the case, whatever you want the case to be, whatever you want the outcome to be, has got nothing to do with it. Now, I have been asked this question in the past, and you're probably thinking of this, so I'll throw this into the mix. Someone walks up to me and says, well, what about an exam? Okay? I want to study hard and I want to pass this exam. Clearly and obviously, I can decide what the outcome is going to be. If I don't sit the exam, I'm not going to pass the exam. So how can you tell me that I have, what my liking, what my desire, what my wish has got nothing to do with the outcome? Well, you see, what you've got to understand there is whether you sit the exam is also a condition for the outcome. It's a cause for that effect. Now, you could have studied many hours, you could have done lots of practice, you could have done lots of hard work preparing for your exam, but there is one key condition that needs to come into play for the outcome, that is you passing the exam, and that is you going and sitting the exam. If you don't sit for your examination, then you're not going to pass your exam, quite clearly. It's quite binary, to be honest. But the reason you are passing that exam is not because you want to pass that exam, not because that's what you're wanting or that's what you're wishing for. It's because all of the conditions for you to pass that exam are being put into play. So you're studying hard, you're doing all your homework, you're taking all the lessons, you're having your extra classes, plus you're sitting the exam. Plus, you're feeling good on the day you go to the exam. What if you have a really bad headache and you can't focus on your paper? What if you run out of ink and that stresses you out? What if you run out of time? See, all of these things are causes that give you that outcome, that give you that effect. So it's cause and effect. As long as the conditions line up, you get the outcome that you get. Simple as that. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. So that is the concept of anicca. So anicca in quite simple terms is the philosophy, is the doctrine that nothing is the way it is because you want it to be the way that it is. It's the way it is because all of the conditions for it to be the way it is have been lined up in that way. Again, going back to the case of the farmer, it's not raining because the farmer wants rain today. It's raining because there's the clouds are sufficiently they're holding sufficient humidity. It's the right temperature. There's the right amount of wind, and whatever the conditions are that need to be right for it to rain. And also when it's not raining and the farmer wants it to rain, it's not raining because the farmer wants it to rain or the farmer doesn't want it to rain. Whatever the farmer wants has got nothing to do with that. It is not a condition. It's not a cause that's going to give rise to that effect. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay? So that's anicca. Now, how does anicca then lead to dukkha and therefore to anatta? Let's discuss that. If something is anicca, and yet you don't understand, you don't view it in that way, you don't see it that way, which is how all animals have been living for, throughout samsara. This is why we still go through samsara. So it's not an if, it's a because, really. If you understand anicca to its fullest extent, you are an arahant. So if you're not an arahant, including myself, it's because our understanding of anicca is not complete. It's not. There's more in anicca for us to understand. But the basic doctrine, the most fundamental level, can be understood by most people, and that is what we're talking about here. Now, if something is anicca, but you don't view it as being anicca, you don't accept it as being anicca, by which I mean it's not to my liking, it's only the way it is because the right conditions have lined up for it to be the way it is, what do I do? So I'm thinking it's the way it is because I want it to be the way it is. What do I do then? Well, what I do then is the cause for all of my suffering. And that is to go and attach myself to it. I set expectations. I set an expectation that, here's what it needs to be in the next few moments, in the next moment, the next day, right now, here's what it needs to be. So for example, let's go back to the farmer. Let's say the farmer is looking to, they're looking to reap their crop tomorrow. Now, so it hasn't rained for some time, but he's been watering it through irrigation. So it's water that he's been it's not water from the sky. It's just water that he's been using from rivers, etc. to feed his crop. But say he's going to reap his crop tomorrow, and he's hoping, he's praying that it doesn't rain tomorrow. Why? Because if it rains, and if it rains hard, then that's going to destroy his entire crop. It's going to destroy all his hard work. There are stories of this, there are examples of this in the Tripitaka where, this story has happened exactly this way, and the Lord Buddha goes and explains he speaks to a farmer who finds himself in this position where he's been looking forward to reaping his crop for some time, and unfortunately on the day or on the night following which he was going to reap his crop, there are torrential rains, and all his hard work goes to waste, and then he's distraught. He finds himself he's completely disappointed, and he finds himself in tatters. And the Lord Buddha goes and preaches the Dhamma to him and saves him from further disappointment and suffering. But if we come back to the farmer that I'm talking about today, if this farmer is looking to reap his crop tomorrow and it's raining, clearly and quite obviously, you can imagine that he's going to wish, he's going to hope, and he's going to pray that it doesn't rain overnight. He's going to pray that it doesn't rain tomorrow. So he's going to set that expectation. He's going to hope for that. Because he's not seeing that rain is all but cause and effect. As long as the conditions are lined up for it to rain tomorrow, it's going to rain tomorrow. Whether I want it to rain or not has got nothing to do with that. He's not seeing that. If he doesn't see that, if he doesn't see the reality there, he's going to attach himself to that outcome. He's going to attach himself to the outcome where there is no rain. It's going to be a dry day. Now, the moment he does that, if it rains the following day, what do you think is going to happen? He's going to be distraught. He's going to suffer. He's going to be completely shattered. Why? Because he didn't want it to rain, because when it rains, it's going to destroy his crop and all his hard work along with that. So isn't the problem here that he set an expectation for it not to rain, then it rained, and now he's suffering? This is why the Lord Buddha teaches us that expectation, which is a result of attachment, leads to suffering. Tanhai jayati soko. Now, I said at the beginning, this is something I've been contemplating on, reflecting on the last week. And what I've been thinking about is, if you think about, what is the most valuable thing? What is it that beings, whether that's human beings, devas, brahmas, animals, beings, any kind of being, what is it that all beings hold most dear? What is it that beings value the most? What do you think it is? Do you think it's family? Do you think it's their vehicles? Do you think it's money? Do you think it's happiness? What do you think? Well, let's just take people. What do you think people hold most dear? Is it property? Is it money? Is it food? Think about it. Because the bigger it is, as in the more you hold it dear, the more you're going to suffer. So if I give you an example, the more you're attached to something, let's take two objects that you might own. Let's say you have an iPad, and let's say you also own a mobile phone. Okay? Now if you're more attached to your iPad, then losing say you walk home one day, you walk in and you find that your iPad and phone have gone missing. Which do you start looking for first? If you're attached more to your iPad, you're going to start looking for your iPad first. If you're more attached to your phone, then you're going to start looking for your phone first. So the more you're attached to something, the more the loss of that is going to make you suffer. The more decay and loss of that object, that thing, or that incident is going to make you suffer. I mean, it could be something really simple. Let's say you're looking forward to your birthday because you have been promised, someone promises you a bicycle, the other promises you, say, a toy car. I'm thinking more about the kids right now, because I know we do have quite a few of them also. If you are more attached to a bike, then you're gonna, and you don't get it, you're gonna suffer more than if you don't get your car, your toy car. So you see, the more you're attached to something, the more you're going to suffer when that comes to a loss, or when you don't receive it, when you can't find it, when you can't locate it, when it goes to death, decay, you're going to suffer. Again, think about two people that you might like. One you like a lot more than the other. Whose loss are you going to mourn more? You're going to mourn the loss of the person you like the most, or the person you like more than the other person, right? So just a few examples to get you to think about this. Now, my question to you is, using that as your basis for trying to figure out what it is that you are most attached to, what do you value the most, have a think about what is it which if I lose, what is it if it goes to decay or death, I suffer the most? And I threw in some pointers, some examples. Is it your car? Is it your family? Is it your food? Well, what I realized is actually it's none of them. It's not even your life. You see, what people are most attached to, what people value the most, is the simple thing called expectation. It's the depth of expectation that causes people to go crazy. It's the demise, it's the death, it's the decay of expectation, the jara marana of expectation that causes people, that causes beings to suffer more than anything else. Now, even in the examples I gave you before, take two people that you like. Why do you like those two people? Is it not because you have expectation in them? Whether it's your friends, your family, is it not because you have expectation? Let's take two people on their deathbed. One, they're both really ill, but the doctor said, we are able to recover this person. It's going to be difficult, but one of these people we are going to be able to recover. It's going we're going to have to keep them under observation, and we're going to have to do some operations, but we're going to be able to recover them. The other person, we're not going to be able to recover. And you then, you live with that fact. So he says in 6 months' time, this person is gonna die, and that's the person that they've said we're not going to be able to recover. But the other person, they can. Okay? Now, time passes by, so now your expectation is that one of these people is going to be able to get out of bed and go back to living a normal life, whereas the other person is going to pass away. What if it happens the other way around? If it happens the way that you're expecting it to happen, obviously you're going to suffer because you're still losing someone that you love, someone that you like. But what if it happens the other way around? What if the person that passes away is the person that you were not expecting to pass away? What happens then is the death of expectation. Your expectation has not been fulfilled. You have been disappointed. And then you're going to suffer. You're going to suffer a lot. In the example where I asked you, you have someone's promised you a bicycle, someone else has promised you a toy car. Why is it that if you're expecting if it's your bicycle that you really want and you don't get, you suffer the most? Is it not because it's your expectation of that bicycle that has just been destroyed? See, this is why the Lord Buddha says, Tanha jayati sopa, and I've said that 3 times already today. But it's that tanha, it's that attachment that gives rise to this expectation. The moment you're attached to something, you're not attached to something in the present moment, because the present moment is the moment that is. It's the way it is at this moment in time. So if it's raining right now, it's raining right now. You don't set expectations on this precise, specific moment. You always set an expectation on the next moment. That moment could be a day away, it could be a month away, it could be a year away, it could be 10 years away, it could be 100 years away, it could be a second away. It could be the next millisecond. But you always set expectations on a future moment. And as soon as you set that expectation, you now want that outcome. You're looking for that outcome. You're hoping for, you're desiring that outcome. Not realizing that setting an expectation is a completely futile exercise. It's a completely useless thing to do. And not only that, that is going to be the root to your suffering. Because if everything is in fact anicca, everything that is conditioned is the way it is because there are conditions that give the result that you're seeing today or right now. The moment those conditions change, the outcome is going to be different. So what's the point of then setting an expectation on that? Because the moment you set an expectation, you want it to be a certain way. Let's go back to the game, the cricket match, Sri Lanka playing England. There's going to be a bunch of people that are expecting Sri Lanka to win. There's going to be a bunch of people that are expecting England to win. Now they're both setting expectations. Clearly, one of them is going to be disappointed. 99% of the time. All right, let's not talk about it when a match is drawn. Well, even then, if you're wanting Sri Lanka to win, if you're wanting England to win, then the other team has to lose. You're not wanting a tie, you're wanting one team to win. And the moment you set that expectation, obviously you are setting that expectation on a future moment, but the moment you set that expectation, you're completely ignoring the fact that my expectation has nothing to do with what this outcome is going to be. It's all to do with causes and effects. As long as the conditions are there for whichever team to win, that team's going to win, whether I want that to be the case or not, has got nothing to do with this. So that is where dukkha comes in. Because, and I'm just talking about one form of dukkha. There are three different types of dukkha: viparinama dukkha, sankhara dukkha. Okay, but I'm just talking about dukkha in general in this situation here. So we're talking about anicca. We talked about anicca being things are the way they are, not because you want it to be the way it is, but because the conditions are right for it to be the way it is. Then we talked about dukkha, if something is the way it is because the conditions are there for it to be the way it is, but yet you then go on and set expectations based on your views, that based on your hope, your desires, that, I wish that it were such and such, or I wish that it was, if it were this and not that. The moment you set that expectation, you're setting yourself up for disappointment. Possible disappointment. Why? Because what you're hoping for may or may not happen. It may happen if the conditions are right for it to happen. It may not happen if the conditions are not right for it to happen. But your wish, your hope, your desire has got nothing to do with it. You see how simply saying that something is impermanent does not give this profound meaning to what the Lord Buddha described? You see how now if something is anicca, it leads to dukkha? Hopefully this is sinking in. Simply saying that something is anitya or impermanent, then therefore leads to suffering, does not give this profound, deep meaning to what the Lord Buddha taught. I mean, quite frankly, before the Lord Buddha's time, do you think people lived their life thinking, oh, everything I see around me is permanent. This tree is permanent. My life is permanent. This house that I've built is permanent. Do you think that's how people lived their lives before the Lord Buddha came into being? Do you think people needed Lord Buddha to come along and tell them that, hey guys, actually, things are impermanent? And then they go, oh, never realized that. Really? Really? It doesn't take a Buddhist to realize that, things are impermanent. People died before the Lord Buddha's time, many, many times. People saw death around them, people saw disease around them, people saw healing, people saw, things break, families break. All of these things happen. People saw wars, people dying, disease, all of these things. Flowers dying, trees falling, storms, all of these things are examples of anitya or impermanence. You don't need a Buddha to explain that. I mean, quite frankly. But the meaning that we've just been talking about, how things are not the way they are because you want it to be the way they are. But without an understanding of that, if you then go set expectations because you're thinking, actually, no, it is the way it is because I want it to be the way it is. Based on that wrong view, mithya drishti, you set an expectation. And the moment you set that expectation, what are you doing? You're setting yourself up for potential disappointment. And if the outcome that you've hoped for, you wished for, does not come through, guess what happens? Disappointment, suffering, unhappiness, dukkha. This is why the Lord Buddha says, anicca, dukkha. Now let's move on to anatta. For someone that understands, for someone that sees, I've not, all this time I've been thinking that things are the way they are because I want it to be the way it is. I want it to be a certain way. Well, actually today I realize that nothing's the way it is because I want it to be that way. How I want it to be has got nothing to do with the outcome. Another example just sprang to mind. Let's say you wanted to add up a few numbers and get an answer, right? You write on a piece of paper, A plus B plus C equals Z. And now you go ahead and substitute numbers to A, B and C. So you're writing 2 plus 2 plus 2 equals 6. Now someone says, well, 2 plus 2 plus 2 equals 6 because I want it to be that way. Really? Where does I want 2 plus 2 plus 2 equals 6? Where is my want, my like, my desire? What has that got to do with anything? It's not part of the equation. You know, if you really wanted to add, this is what I want the answer to be, just add a plus 0 to the equation. It's the same thing. So 2 plus 2 plus 2 plus 0 equals 6. What's the plus 0? And that's what I want it to be. Because that's the same effect. Whatever outcome you want in that equation, you know, that factor is the same as adding a 0 to that equation. Adding a 0 makes no difference to that equation. Just as much as your desire, your wish, your liking has got nothing to do with that equation. So in the case of anatta, when you understand this doctrine, when you understand this theory, when you understand this philosophy, you then begin to realize what I've been doing all along is setting expectations on something that has nothing to do with what my expectation is. The outcome has simply been a case of outputs, or rather effects, dependent on causes. That's got nothing to do with what I want. To continue to keep expecting things, to continue to keep wishing for a certain outcome, is useless, meaningless. Now, in Sinhala, atta or artha is meaning. So if someone asks you, what's the meaning of the word anicca, they could say, what is the artha of anicca? Anicca ki artha mokadda? That's the single in Sinhala. That's how you would ask. Artha is meaning. So, and that is what atta is, meaning, essence. What is the essence of something? Now, when you understand that, you know, when you understand for yourself clearly, it's crystal clear how something is the way it is because there are the right conditions to give a certain output, to give a certain outcome. For me to then go and set my expectations, attach myself to that because I'm expecting it to be a certain way, I'm thinking that is to my liking, the whole process of doing that is meaningless. There is simply no essence in doing that. It's futile. It's useless. That is the meaning of anatta. Now, when you understand what we've just been discussing, do you not feel that actually I can see how this might be something a Lord Buddha would have explained? But if I then said, okay, let's go back to the conventional meanings. You know, let's say my hand is anitya, my hand is impermanent, and therefore my hand brings me suffering, and therefore my hand is non-self. My hand is anitya, my hand is dukkha, my hand is anatma. What meaning does that give you? I mean, quite frankly, I'm still struggling to find meaning in that, and I doubt I ever will. Or take any other object, your car, whether that's a toy car or a proper car. My car is impermanent. My car therefore brings me suffering, and my car is non-self. Don't you think when the Buddha described, if the Buddha had put it that way, you would have had a few people scratching their heads, wondering, what do you mean my car is no self? Whereas if what the Buddha did say is, your car is anicca. It's not the way it is, if you're looking at a brand new car or a car that you like, it's not the way it is because you want it to be the way it is. Your car is running smooth, or your car is brand spanking new, or your car is functioning properly because all the right conditions are there for it to function properly. Okay, that makes sense. Now don't go setting expectations on that though. Don't go setting expectations on this is my desire, this is my wish, I want it to be this way. Because the moment you do that, what if those conditions change? What if those conditions change? As soon as the conditions change, the output is going to be different, the outcome is going to be different, the result is going to be different. Now if the result is, if you then understand that process, my car is only the way it is because the right conditions are there for it to be the way it is. Therefore, it's meaningless for me to go set expectations on that. It's futile, it's essenceless if I were to go and expect my car to be a certain way. Because as soon as the conditions change, the effect's going to change. So whatever it is, the way it is right now, is the way it is right now. Don't you think that would have helped a lot of people come to their senses, come to an understanding? Now I see, then this is how everything around me, this whole universe operates. My children, they're anicca. My house, it's anicca. My wife is anicca. By that I mean again, they're not the way they are because I want it to be there the way they are. They are the way they are because the conditions have lined up for them to be the way they are. What about my life? This body? And my mind? Is my mind the way it is because I want it to be the way it is? Well, if your mind was the way it is because you want it to be the way it is, shouldn't you be able to focus on one thing for as long as you wanted to? And think about nothing else whatsoever, no distractions? So say I asked you to think about the Buddha. Think about a Buddha statue. And I said, think about a Buddha statue for a whole 15 minutes and don't think about anything else. And if I were to go on silent just now and asked you to think about that for the next 15 minutes, do you think you'd be able to maintain your concentration on that? Really? On the Buddha statue and nothing else. You can't think about the Buddha's Dhamma, you can't think about what I've been talking about, you can't think about the sounds that are coming from outside, or what's going on TV, or what's cooking, or what the weather's like if it's raining outside. You can't think about your friends, your family, nothing whatsoever. You've got to think exactly about that and that only. Do you think your mind is the way it is because you want it to be the way it is? Or is it because the conditions are there for it to be the way it is? So, this is where, the question we were trying to answer is, how do you reconcile the contradiction between rebirth and anatta? Hopefully, you're beginning to see that actually there is absolutely no contradiction between these two. Because anatta, as we have just described, is nothing to do with self. It's not to do with self or non-self, or the word self has nothing to do with anatta. Just as much as what I want it to be has nothing to do with anicca. Self has nothing to do with anatta. In fact, the Lord Buddha says in his own words, I don't preach self, I don't preach a doctrine about self, which I think I said at the beginning. I don't teach a doctrine about non-self. In his own words he says, I don't teach non-self. And then we go on to say that he talks about anatma, which is non-self. Well, he's already said, I don't talk about non-self. So that's the contradiction. The contradiction is using the interpretation no self for the word anatta. I want you to think about this. Don't just take it at face value. Don't just take it because I'm saying this is the case. And as I said, go and look at the Tripitaka if you have access to that. Or as I said, even the Pirit Pota, Pirivana Potvahanse. Look at the Girimananda Sutra, you will see anicca. And also Katamachananda Anatta Sanya. Again, he doesn't talk about an anatma, he talks about anatta. The only time I think Tripitaka mentions the word anatma is when someone actually comes and asks him, what do you think about anatma? And then his reply is, I don't preach anatma. I don't preach that kind of doctrine. So hopefully that's been some food for thought today. And I also want you to think about what I said before. This is about what is it that is most precious to all of us. Come to think of it, it's not our material possessions. It's not people we love. It's not the food we eat. It's not the clothes we wear. It's not the cars we drive. Actually, if we were to describe that, if we were to think that, we are most distraught, we are most disappointed when we lose the things that we love the most, then you've got to understand that actually what you're most attached to is expectation. Expectation of a certain outcome. Because as soon as you realize that expectation is not going to take place, or that expectation is not going to be fulfilled, that is when you're going to be disappointed. We talked about the farmer. The farmer set an expectation, let it be dry tomorrow because I'm going to reap my crop. The farmer is really not disappointed because it rained. The farmer is disappointed because his expectation was destroyed. Why? How do I say this? Because there are days when the farmer wished it would rain. So rain is not what he has a problem with, or it's not rain or the lack of rain that he has a problem with. What he has a problem with is he set an expectation and now he's been disappointed. That expectation has not been fulfilled. That is what has destroyed him. That is what has made him distraught. So, what I would encourage you to do until next week is think about the times, as I've said in the past, these sessions we have, they're only 50% of what's going to help you on your path to Nibbana. The remaining 50%, I would even say 20%. 20% of what you need to cross the bridge to Nibbana is what we talk about here. 80% is your practice. Your application of what we talk about here. How you use the principles we discuss and apply them in your day-to-day lives. How you put them into practice. When you're feeling raga, dvesha and moha, how do you apply the doctrines that we talk about? How do you apply the medication, anicca dukkha anatta, into your lives, into those situations, to recover yourself from those situations, to remove yourself from raga, dvesha, moha, the defilements that take you further in samsara. And that can only come with practice. Because just as you need practice to learn to ride a bike, or to farm, or to drive a car, you need to practice anicca dukkha anatta to help you cross the sea of samsara, the ocean of samsara. So, with that, I hope that today's session has been useful. I have some news for all of you. That is, there's a magazine called Hela Bodupuma. I'll type it into into YouTube and into Skype, Hela Budu Piuma. So there's a magazine called Hela Budu Piuma, and I think if you do an internet search for that, you'll be able to find this magazine. There's an English article that's going to appear in Hela Budu Piuma from here on. It's a 4-page article, and this magazine comes out every Poya day, so obviously once a month. You can go online and find this and get access to this magazine. So there's lots of singular articles, but starting this month, as in the last issue was on the 3rd of November, 2 days ago, came out. There's an English article, 4 pages worth of useful information, I think, and it'll talk about Buddhist concepts. It'll talk about Buddhist philosophy, the deep and hidden meanings of the Buddha's teaching. You know, the Dhamma that we are trying to talk here, the Dhamma that we discuss through these sessions in written form, and hopefully in language that is easy to understand for both our young as well as mature listeners, readers even. If you have any suggestions about perhaps some topics that you might to see on there, then there'll be an email address at the bottom of that article that you can send your comments to. You can also send your comments about your thoughts about the article itself, whether you think they're useful, whether you think there's something else we could possibly do, or that could possibly be done. So share your thoughts. Hopefully that will be of use, and share the message out with anyone else that you might think might find it useful. I think that's all the time we have for today. I'm just going to quickly check to see if there are any questions that have come through in the meantime. On Skype, on YouTube, and on our web radio. No, I think that's all for today. Let's hope and wish that the merits that we have all acquired today in both listening and preaching this Dhamma help us all, the Devas that we invited, the Brahmas that we invited, and all our past friends, our past family, distant relations that we invited at the beginning of this program, as well as all of those people who have helped us come this far, in our understanding, to cross this ocean of samsara, to attain Nibbana. Use the merits that we have all generated today. May the merits help us all attain the supreme bliss of Nibbana in this birth itself, in the era of the Gautama Samma Sambuddha Shasana. May you all attain the supreme bliss of Nibbana. Theruvan Saranai.